This conference will now be recorded.
I should be able to see my screen now. Andy, can you see my screen?
Not yet, no.
Well, it says it's
Yes.
sharing.
I can see it.
You can see it? Excellent. And you should see it moving now. Okay, so it says what it says on the screen there. And this is quite awkward, because I've not talked about it much, because I'm actually quite embarrassed a little bit about it, because I don't do anything to achieve awards like this. And some of you have known me all my career, or nearly all my career, as we were just talking to Emma just before we came on live. So I've known Emma for nearly 30 years now. And I'm sure 30 years ago, Emma wouldn't have thought, Brian's going to get an MBE one day, because you don't aspire for things like this. And certainly, I haven't talked about it yet, so this is the first time I present about it. And I don't really get nervous doing presentations normally, but this one is just a bit odd, because I'm talking about, it's almost like I'm lauding it up, but I'm not. It's because I'm still pretty humbled by it. So yeah, it's great to have been recognised for some of the stuff I'm going to talk about today. But certainly, yeah, it wasn't something I was aspiring to, but it's mainly about a relentless focus on safety of the track worker, and being there, visible and felt leadership. It's not just talking about it, it's going out there and doing it, and being able to talk to anybody about the track worker safety stuff that we talk about, and driving those campaigns right until, and being belligerent about it. And if I really believe something on safety, really driving it to a conclusion such that it becomes a safer place to work, and lots of charity work, which I'll talk about towards the end. So an introduction to me. Joined the YTS as Andy said, back in 1988. I joined the railway, although technically 88 was joining the YTS, which was a link to the railway. Yeah, I was 16 years, 328 days old. Didn't have a clue what was going to happen. Wasn't really from an academic, well, wasn't actually from an academic family at all. But this was an opportunity offered to me by the industry, with a handful of GCSEs straight out of school. And that was kind of what I looked like around then. That was probably about 6 months before I joined the railway. And yeah, and luckily for me, after 4 months of working with the likes of Andy and others, it was just prior to Andrew joining into coming up to Devon Place in Newport. But yeah, I was offered a role in Devon Place, the car park at Newport there, in the red brick building, which is no longer a railway building, I don't believe. Yeah, I was offered a job in the civil engineer's office in January '89, and literally overnight my wages had trebled from £29.50 a week to about £89 a week. So it was like winning the lottery for me. In those days, you had to to actually increase your money, you had to work overtime. So I spent a few years doing the rounds on a technical training scheme. So spent some time in the Pyrway drawing office with Andy, and I likewise spent some time in the bridge, which we were talking to Emma about just before we came on, with the likes of Doug Jones and Robin Jenkins and Alistair and Steve Vincent, to name but a few. And building section with the likes of Nick Kinman, general section with the likes of Dave Cowles and Jim Filer. Loads of names I could mention from back in the day. But and also during this time, I spent 4 years studying civil engineering in Treforest in Pontypridd. And then so I had a decision to make it in 1994 then, about what direction I was going to take. And I kind of, I guess with Andy's help, I fell in love with Pway, and ended up staying with Pway, going to track renewals rather than maintenance. And I kind of fell in love with it, fell in love with the overtime. As I said, it was a very low rate of pay in those days, albeit with the overtime you could work at weekends. It was part of the reason I decided to stay with track renewals. And actually, apart from a few years of building some stations just before privatisation, I've been with track renewals nearly all of my career, as I said there. And I've done plainline S&C and high output track renewals all over the UK. And I'm currently back home in Wales and Western. So since devolution, I've landed as program director role in Wales and Western, doing plainline S&C and high output track renewals. So I'm going to move on from that slide unless anybody's got any questions.
nobody's come up with anything yet at the
Yeah,
moment, Brian.
I'm still enjoying
Thank you.
it. Still a great place to work. And actually what it's good to see now is, going back to the first point on that slide, is more and more apprenticeships being offered now, because mine was kind of an apprenticeship of sorts. And it's good to see we're offering those around a lot more now as well. So what were the triggers to me focusing on safety, health and well-being? Well, there's quite a number of them actually. So the first one is actually about me. Before privatisation, I actually crashed 3 times, all between Cardiff and Swansea, all because I've been working nights, and all related to fatigue. Yet nobody in that time, it wasn't an open discussion that we had. I was just accused of being a bad driver, which I probably was as well. But it was the reasons were it was about fatigue. You could argue driving when you're fatigued is bad driving anyway, which it is. So part of my focus is down to that. And now I'm leading and managing people. You know, I have a duty of care for those, that they don't make the same mistakes as me. So that's one of the triggers. There's an event which I'm going to talk about, which is a serious event, on the 11th of June 2005. There's one thing that's really important. This is becoming a CDM duty holder, because you know, that comes with a lot of responsibility. So I was, in old language, before CDM 2015, I was the CDM coordinator. Yeah, I felt a huge responsibility being that, and it refocused my mind from a safety perspective. I want to talk about the defib challenge, which I invented, because somebody did have a cardiac arrest and died on one of my sites a few years back. And I guess in leadership roles, we have more opportunity to help and influence others, and help and influence others to help others as well. So that's that. And there's a little bit in there about me a couple of years ago being diagnosed with cancer. It's not put on there as a sympathy vote, it's put on there as a, now what that allows me to do now is I understand a lot more about cancer now, and it allows me to help anybody with the same thing in the future. So fatigue, talked about this just now. It was about me falling asleep once at Margam, once at Pyle, and once with a fellow PWI member, Brian Toomey, who lots of you will know, was in the vehicle with me on the 3rd time when I crashed into a bush. When he was using the vehicle, and I remember the vehicle's number plate and everything, one of the old Ford Escort Estates we had, I crashed it into a bush when I was driving to my house, and then he was taking the vehicle home, albeit he couldn't then take the vehicle home because I crashed it into a bush, which wasn't a great experience, because that's probably the worst of the 3, because I had somebody else in the vehicle with me. Some accidents on my watch, what I'll call on my watch, and I'll show you some photographs in a sec. These things have happened and could have ended up with fatalities in my team. And driving is a key thing, that we spend a lot of time watching people on site, but then we don't watch them between work site and site, or site and work site and home and work site. So there's some pieces of work I want to talk about with that. Some fatigue surveys I ran. The M4 example at Chippenham back in 2014, where sadly some Carillion members of staff died, just by sheer coincidence. The week before, I'd done a fatigue survey. Now, those Carillion guys weren't in tracks projects. They were actually working on behalf of Reading. But there's a massive coincidence, and I'll talk to you about the I am your driver thing in a sec. The safe system of travel, which again I've kind of invented for myself and my team, is the duty of care thing, and ensuring that travel is treated as a task. So for my direct reports, I need them to tell me what their travel plan is, so I can endorse it. And if it changes, they should come to me and talk to me about it if it changes for any reason, and then I have to endorse that change. In the same way that if a safe system of work for site activity changes, then we should be endorsed by a senior member of the team or your line manager. And again, talking about the CDM duty holder thing, really, really important. The I am the driver thing, and I'm not going to read through all of this, but this was just by sheer coincidence. I ran one fatigue survey on my own site at Watford. Then a few months, and then the Chippenham thing happened. Then a few weeks after the Chippenham event, or maybe a month or so after the Chippenham event, I got a national survey ran across the whole country on many, many sites. And this, what you can see on the screen here, and I'm happy to share these slides afterwards, so you don't have to read through it. This was as a result of the conversation that I had on the site that I went to on that night at Ascot, which is down in Wessex. And on my journey back, I'd had some sleep. On my journey back on the M4, a contractor's vehicle passed me doing about 90 miles an hour, it says on the slide there. And then I contacted the employer of those people. Just so happens they were driving from the same site as me. And what you can see on that slide there, that's an actual event. Yet those people that were in that vehicle were really, really passionate about the Chippenham incident because they knew the Chippenham people who died. Yet they still chose to do this thing that's in this slide. So it was a real lesson, and no matter how you talk about things to people, and also how people talk back to you to say, yes, I take this really seriously, they went and did that. Anyway, and these are some of the accidents that have happened on my watch. This was up in mid Wales. Somebody rolled their car down a bank, 2 people in the vehicle, allegedly hit water on the road, ended up going down the bank and had to be pulled back out. And as you can see, lucky to be alive. This is another chap who admitted to being driving while fatigued. A guy, I say in my team, he worked for the contractor, but I see the contractors as part of my team. He was working in my team, chose to drive when tired. That was as a result of his fatigue. Same here, that's 2 different vehicles. Again, people not doing the right thing. So anyway, that was part of the reason why I'm passionate about the driving thing, much to do with me about being fatigued when I was driving, but equally, lots of events still happen, no matter how passionate I am. I can't control everything that people decide to still do, but I've got to cover myself and I've got a duty of care for my teams as well. Any questions on that before I move on?
Yeah, I've got a question, Brian. Like you, I managed to crash a railway van whilst driving to work, and I got DP'd as well for my trouble for failing to take my period of rest. But yeah, as you say, it seemed to be at one time it was just a sort of accepted risk, wasn't it, that people would fall asleep and have accidents. How do we balance now? I mean, I know you're doing a huge amount of work in track safety, which you're going to come on to, but one of the riskiest things our guys probably, and indeed us, do these days is travel by road. So how do we meet that challenge? It's
Yeah, the biggest challenge, Andy, so we all know that there's the fatigue monitoring tool, and everybody throws this at me all the time. The fatigue monitoring tool is a great tool because it does a job.
Yeah.
What it doesn't do, Andy, and if you look back, I flick back to this bit here.
Yeah.
So what it doesn't really control, so let's say, and I'm sure when you crashed your vehicle, it's likely to have been a Saturday night when you normally worked during the week on days. If you look at this example here, the individual admitted to me when I had a safety conversation with him that he'd worked the day before in a warehouse.
Yeah.
And also he hadn't had any sleep. So when he was driving home, it was over 29 hours before that he'd actually had his last sleep. He says he had a sleep in the van. I think he was trying to keep me pleased, keep me happy there, that he'd had a couple of hours in the van before he left site, but he hadn't slept for over 29 hours. So what the fatigue management tool doesn't really do is it doesn't deal with the fact that we trust people. You know, I trust myself that if I'm going to work Saturday night, I will rest myself. Or equally, if I'm driving home on Sunday morning after my work Saturday night, I will have a rest before I drive home. And it's that trust thing. It's around trusting people, especially when they're the driver of multiple people in a vehicle. We do put a lot of trust in the individuals to do the right thing, and unfortunately, that trust is not always it's not always good, because people still do the wrong thing. And we've had lots of occasions, not just this one. This was just one I focused on. We've had lots of occasions where people have admitted after events that they've driven whilst fatigued.
Yeah. Do you think we've got a problem with the industry with using workers who are not, if you like, not employees? There's been several quite serious incidents where fatigue has been related with people on 0 hours contracts and working for subcontractors. And have you got any thoughts on that?
I think it seems like a bigger problem because we probably use more people in that world than we do our own directly employed people to do similar types of work. But I would imagine, and again, this is me imagining it, proportionately, we've got just as big a problem in network rail. in directly employed people, because directly employed people will still take no rest, especially the ones, you know, and I've got engineers and I've got program and project managers in my team that work all week on days and they go and work a Saturday night. And that's the worst thing. It's the circadian rhythm being affected by somebody going off days and into a night shift, and then all of a sudden on Monday going back to days again. And I'm sure, Andy, when you were doing it regularly, Saturday nights, even getting back into that day routine during the week is quite tough. And then no sooner have you back kind of start and getting back into that routine, you've got another Saturday night the following week, or a Friday night even. So yeah, I think we've got a problem still in directly employed people, because it's about the fear of missing out on a Saturday, or the going shopping with your partner or playing with your kids on a Saturday, even though you know you've got work Saturday night. It's that fear of missing out thing for me, I think, is a problem for the whole industry, irrespective of the employer. Any more questions before I move on from that one?
Anybody else got a question for Brian? No? Okay.
Okay, the next event, this is quite a tragic event, I'm afraid. So on the 11th of June 2005, we had a fatality. It was at Acton, which is just 4 miles outside of London. So those of you who've worked in the Bristol Parkway Trap Renewals office will know there's a room called the Wilkinson Room. And I don't know if you know that the Wilkinson Room is named after Jason Wilkinson. So Jason Wilkinson was an employee of ours when I worked. It was just prior to me joining Network Rail, actually. This was a year before. So I worked for the contractor, I worked for Colas, and Jason Wilkinson was one of our team. He hadn't been working for us long, but he was known to our team, and he just joined us very, very recently, about a couple of months before, I think it was. And what had happened, he was bringing an engineering train into the work site, and one of the lighting columns had fallen down in front of his train. One of the temporary lighting stanchions. So what he decided to do was do the right thing and get off the train, pick up the lighting stanchion, and then get back on the train. But for reasons unbeknown to us, he got off the train. So we were working on the main lines and the relief lines were open. Unbeknown to us, he got off the train on the wrong side, and he stepped straight into the path of a passenger train, and lost his life. Now, the reason why this was a game changer for me, so this was about halfway through my career. So I joined in 88, this was 2005, and we're now in 2021, so it's roughly about halfway through. This was a real game changer for me, and that last point I put on there now, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about safety now is I had to go to court. I was actually, by the time we got to court, I was actually working for Network Rail by then, but I still had to go to court to represent the company, to represent myself, because he was one of my team, and we didn't really know what had gone wrong, because everybody knew what was under possession, everybody knew what lines were live, and we'll never know why he got out of that train on the wrong side, and we'll never know why he lost his life. And it's probably, well, I know it's definitely actually the worst thing that's happened in my career, because we'll never know. And standing up there in front of the judge, in front of the family, is by far the worst thing I'll ever have to do at work, even if I work for another 17 years, which is highly unlikely. But if I work for another 17 years, there will be nothing to match how bad that was. And yeah, I've mentioned that already. It was just me trying to justify what we'd done with all our safe systems of work and everything. And we weren't found wanting, which was good. But, partly, obviously, somebody still lost their life, but there was nothing that could be found that we'd done wrong. That would have led to Jason stepping in front of the train. And as I said, I'd never want me or any of my team to go through that ever again. It's because it's the worst thing that will happen to anybody. The fatality was bad, and then closely followed by standing up and trying to justify actions is quite a tricky thing to do. So as you can see, it was game changer for me, and that kind of hopefully makes sense. This next one. So I had a site at Watford, a trap renewal site, which was the renewal of the junction at Watford, south and north. Although the north didn't get done in the end because the access got taken away from us, and actually they just literally the weekend before last been in and done some of the north again. So anyway, we had a job at Watford, and I was pretty disgusted by the state of the site. and I was working for Network Rail, and I was the CDM coordinator at the time. So I'm expecting my 2 contractors there. So we had a principal contractor in Siemens doing the signalling, and the principal contractor of Colas doing the track. So I'm expecting my principal contractors to work on that site, yet the site wasn't safe. And I thought, well, from a Network Rail perspective, that's double standards, because what we would expect handed back is something very safe and something very tidy. So I engaged with a lot of Network Rail people who I felt, in my opinion, were accountable for that state, albeit not directly. But you'll see on that photograph there, got all sorts of people there, very clean PPE, lots of them. But I picked, and there was one more to add to that, Caroline Higgins, who was working up at London at the time. I brought all these people in on a Saturday night, borrowed an RRV and machine controller off the contractor, and we took some responsibility as Network Rail to clear the site. Because I felt obligated to do that, because I couldn't have those double standards on one of my sites. It just didn't seem right. And then what's happened then is this became what's known as now as Prep for Safety. This was the kind of trial run, and then it got badged as Prep for Safety, and that kind of the principle got adopted on lots of sites around the country, where we spend a little bit of money tidying up before we go in and do the works. And this is old legacy stuff that was on this site of Watford from over many years, whether it was maintenance or formal renewals. It was stuff that was there which was making the site unsafe. So that was another thing that started with one of my projects. And this one, again, a sad event made me think of this thing. So a few years back, when we were doing the works in and around Bathampton, Box Tunnel, and we had T-Pod and T-Pod 1 and 2, and all the things we had to deliver the work in those places. There was a chap, and I'd actually been to site the week before, and I'd spoken to this chap, and some of you might know a chap called Yankee Dave. His name was Dave Kerno, affectionately known as Yankee Dave, and I'd only spoken to him the week before, and then the following week he had a cardiac arrest on site, and he died. And that just made me just immediately think, well, what could we have done better? And this was years ago now, so we're in a better place now. But this was about, you know, we see defibs scattered around offices, not at the time, not 100%. And what made me think then, just a few weeks after this event, I was at a hotel. At the start of the meeting, there was about 100 of my team there when I was running Plainline nationally. And at the start of the meeting, I said, right, I want you all to assume I'm not, but I want you all to assume I'm having a cardiac arrest. And after a minute, I want one of you to react and go and find the closest defib. So Andy Hall, who some of you will know, went to the reception in the hotel. This was the Jury's Hotel in Birmingham. The reception in the hotel said, oh no, we haven't got one. The nearest one is in the NatWest Bank, just down by Sainsbury's. So Andy skittled off down to Sainsbury's, to the NatWest rather. The NatWest branch that they talked about had shut down, so he couldn't go there. So he had to come back. And he came back, I don't know, it was probably about 10 minutes later. So I'm probably dead by then, or if not dead, even if somebody had tried to save my life or they'd got an ambulance there to shock me, it's likely I would have had life-changing injuries. So this is where how would you feel came up. So I had this conversation with my team, and I'm always trying to make them feel guilty that, right, now we've had this conversation, if somebody does have a cardiac arrest on one of your sites, just remember this conversation, because you will never know if you would have saved their life or not. And I will send this link out later on. You can watch this video. It explains almost what I've just described there. And this is about getting a defib within 90 seconds. So if you're on one of my sites, I want you to be able to walk to a defib within 90 seconds and walk back with it within 90 seconds. Then let's do the notes. That's 3 minutes. And then after that 3 minutes, you've got a chance of saving somebody's life if they've had a cardiac arrest. Not to be confused with a heart attack. The cardiac arrest is something very different. Now, this campaign has proved to save lives now, where sites that wouldn't have had defibs before had defibs and have ended up saving lives. But also, I've also been on sites where, again, wouldn't have had a defib before, but also the person has actually died. I had 2 phone calls back about a year ago now, when I came back to Wales and Western, 2 phone calls within a couple of days of each other. Both incidents. One was actually a Western incident where somebody had had a cardiac arrest on a site, and there wasn't a defib there. It was a member of the public who was trespassing, I believe, and the mob had gone there. And the individual did die, but there was no defib there. But the other one was the opposite end of the scale, where it was somebody from Van El called me and told me about this fatality they'd had on one of their sites because somebody had had a cardiac arrest and died. But they said, we did all we could because of your campaign. We had a defib there. And we tried to save the individual, but we didn't. But at least we know. So it's kind of where my "how would you feel" thing actually comes from. And it's talking about how would you feel if somebody died on one of your sites and you didn't have a cardiac, you didn't have a defib there now. And the cardiac arrest thing is still something that's a random act. It can happen to anyone, no matter how fit you are. I think I'm relatively fit, but it can happen to me. It doesn't matter how big you are, how old you are, how young you are. It can happen to anyone. And there's lots and lots of events where I've seen them happening, where there's 40,000 fit people running around in circles, running marathons and half marathons. Quite common there, so it could be linked to the run, obviously, but they happen anywhere, and they have happened on our sites. And this one's talking about a consequences campaign, and when you see the slides when I share them, I'll send them so they could be sent on. This was about talking about every action has a consequence. Now, consequence isn't a bad word. Consequence can go either way. And what you'll see on these slides, it wasn't just about the posters we got created through the TSA. This was about the words you can see on the right as well, and allowing people with these posters to have a safety conversation with somebody. Now, these photographs, some of the photographs are actually from sites, our sites, particularly the next one. Now, apologies if you've got squirmy stomachs, but that is off one of my sites quite a few years back now. But that individual who had that injury also is a family member of a senior member of the industry as well, but wasn't wearing gloves. And you know, if the individual was wearing gloves, it probably still would have hurt, but it may not have caused the injury you can see there. So yeah, apologies for that. But this was about the poster, the campaign, the words to allow safety conversations, all sorts of categories of work, of things that I chose to talk about. Yeah, you'll see them when you when I share slides. But I've seen these all over the country now, and people have taken the badges off and changed the badges, which is fine. But I've seen these all over the country, which makes me feel quite proud, and the people who helped me with this from the TSA, same thing. And what about the charity stuff? So where did this all start? Well, back in 2008, just had a bit of a brainwave about starting a band. Never been in a band before, but I was sat next to a lovely chap who used to work with us, who I knew was been a musician all his life, and we were just talking about doing something different for a Christmas party. One night only, and what are we now? In 2021, 13 years on, the band is still going. The band is still raising money, albeit we haven't been able to do anything for the last year. It's all railway people in the band. So what have we done? Well, I've done some running stuff. I wasn't really a runner. Certainly wasn't a runner in 2008, but I took up running in 2013 or 14, I think, and then started doing some charity runs, because as soon as I took up running, somebody challenged me to do a marathon, and I wasn't a runner, much preferred walking, much easier. But somebody challenged me to do a marathon, so I did, and I could only get a place in London Marathon by doing it through a charity, then raised a load of money for Click Sergeant. The band has done, I don't know, we've probably done about 60 to 70 gigs now around the country, all at our own expense, paying for our own hotels and whatever we have to pay for to get there. I climbed Kilimanjaro at my own expense. Again, people were willing to sponsor me for that, which was a great life experience as well. Run marathons, and also with a load of PWI people, so you might recognise Nick Lake and Nick Millington in that picture, and you probably just see Jeff Vincent's head if you know Jeff. So yeah, all sorts of charity stuff, and lots of charities have benefited as well. Click Sergeant, which is a children's cancer charity, slept in Birmingham New Street, which wasn't very pleasant, but slept in Birmingham New Street for the railway children, done a load of stuff for the NSPCC. Shelter Cymru, done a few gigs in Cardiff for them. Macmillan done a load of stuff for them. Action for Children, same in Cardiff. Coincidentally, I was doing some gigs for It's in the Bag, which is a testicular cancer charity, and then obviously by coincidence managed to get testicular cancer myself, which wasn't great, but as I said at the start, you've got to think positive about that. I can talk to people about cancer now, and actually I'm helping my mum now through cancer. My mum's got leukemia, so I'm helping my mum, but at least I know a lot more about cancer now. So every cloud has a silver lining and all that. Done a bit for Bernardo's as well, including writing a song for them as well, which was good. Valley Kids, which is another children's charity. And actually, as I said at the start, and I've said throughout this, so I've helped save lives, I've helped prevent injuries through my work, delivered billions of pounds of track renewals as well in that time, improved lives through charity stuff, and it's kind of enjoyable, the work, the charity. And it wasn't just down to me, because as you'll see from all of those photographs there, there's lots of people, not just on the screen there, that you can see that help me do the actual things, but the people who sponsor me to do stuff, or have sponsored me to do stuff, the people who come to the gigs and pay £10 for a ticket to watch a bunch of railway guys jumping around stage and singing and dancing. So yeah, it's all been good. You know, when I'm 33 years in now, I've got a few years left of me yet to catch up with some of the people on the call. But yeah, it's not just down to me. So it's a big thank you to, I know there's about 18 people on the call. So some of you may have been involved in that charity stuff with me. So thank you. If only I could take lots of people to the palace when we eventually get to go to collect the MBE. I've got a bit of a straight choice, really. I've got a 16-year-old daughter who absolutely wants to come to the palace, and I've got a 69-year-old mum who's currently got leukemia, who would also, I'm sure, like to come with her son to the palace. So I've got a bit of a choice to make there, because it's probably only going to be one, but we'll see. But what I can't do is go to the palace dressed like that. There's a story associated to this photograph. It was the Rail Staff Awards. I was up for a safety award linked to some of the things I've talked about here, and I think they must have emailed the winners in advance saying, look, you might have won, so don't come in the fancy dress that the ceremony is kind of linked to. It was a circus theme, but I must have missed the email, because out of the 19 awards that were presented on the night for all sorts of things, I'd won the safety award, which was one of the last to be presented, and I was the only winner, I think, that was wearing fancy dress. So that's me. Up for any questions now, if anybody's got any, and I'm going to take that image off the screen just in case it frightens anyone who's scared of clowns.
Right, thank you, Brian. Have you got any more questions? An interesting thought is based on that talk is, you know, for those you were on tonight, do you actually know where the nearest defibrillator is? I mean, obviously, if you're at home, you probably haven't got one, but if you're in a workplace, or do you know where there is one in your workplace? So it's certainly an interesting thought, isn't it? So,
yeah, Andy, following on from that, Andy, it's a good point you mentioned about home. So I've made my daughter do the defib challenge from home, because I could have a cardiac arrest at home, and my daughter might be the one here that has to go and find the closest defib, and mine just so happens to be in the local hostelry around the corner. But yours might not be. Yours might be a mile away. If it's a mile away, there's no chance of you getting there and back in 10 minutes unless you've got a very fast car and prepared to speed.
yeah. Okay. So yeah, an interesting thought, and I think it's thank you very much for that, Brian. But it's really interesting again how safety has changed since I started in the industry. With the I mean, when I started back in 1973, we'd only just made the little mini vests mandatory. Safety boots were your own responsibility to provide, or you had to buy them, and you could buy the railway ones, which were crippling, but you could buy yourself some decent ones. And now people walk uptown lunchtime to get a sandwich, dressed entirely in orange, and don't bat an eyelid, you know. And people used to not wear the HV because they felt silly. And it's very interesting how long it takes us to build a culture, a safety culture. So has anyone else got any questions for Brian before we carry on. Yeah.
I haven't got a question. This is Emma Holst. I've just got a comment and a memory. I remember that when I was working in Newport and station buildings at about the same time as Brian, I remember somebody had filled in an accident report because they'd fallen asleep whilst driving. And they had put on the accident report that they had lost consciousness because they felt they just felt it was the wrong wording to say that they'd fallen asleep. So they looked it up in the dictionary. It said that they'd lost consciousness, and so they put that on their accident report. But the manager that they handed it into was extremely unhappy that they had chosen to describe it like that. And I just think that's a whole scale change from back then to where we are now, and that it's more important to look at why the accident happened and the factors around it rather than, you know, how it's come to your attention or what words have been used to describe it, in a sense. You know, it's more important.
The fear of this day and age, I would hope that all of my team and your teams would hold their hands up and say, I've fallen asleep. Whereas back in the day, you know, late 80s, early 90s, it's the fear of what would happen if you admitted that you'd fallen asleep at the wheel. And I'm being totally honest here. I fell asleep 3 times, and did I own that at the time about falling asleep at the wheel? No. The Montego that we used to have, Andy, the big red Montego, you might remember. I tried to write it off for you, but it came back again. You know, but I said I'd had a blowout, you know, and I'm openly admitting now that I never. It's just I feared that I would lose my job if I told people that I'd fallen asleep at the wheel. And that's not right. And hopefully this day and age we're away from that kind of mentality now.
No, it certainly would have been a disciplinary offence. It's interesting, and that's a very good point. And the other one I remember on accident reports was the manager's comment was "take more care," was a favourite one, and which is really just accepting that accidents happen rather than trying to understand why they happen. And in the TME training we're doing now, we've introduced quite a lot looking at accidents, but looking at them from a behavioural point of view. You know, to try and, because you know, Ray produces an excellent report which explains as best they can what happened, but we're trying to dig in now to find out why it happened. You know, what were the motivations behind their people? What were their distractions? What were the things going on? So I think that's a thing we do now. I think we make much more effort now to try and understand the behavioural issues behind accidents now. And it is a challenge. It is a challenge. Yeah. So, right. Any other comments or questions or?
Just a quick one from me, Steve Sharp.
Hi, Steve.
An imposter in here, signal engineer. Worked with Brian through most of my time with track renewals, and many of these projects and initiatives been through them, and yes, they have definitely had an effect. And I think any of us that have been there with them going on have learned from them. And I can say the defibrillator is 2 walls behind me in the office, and it's the pub down the road, which is closed now. But but the experiences, again, I'm another one that's had definite encounters with the rumble strip of the central reservation at 80 mile an hour on the M6. Which is not a nice place to do it. So I think we are a lot more conscious now. People are getting better at being honest, but there is still work to do, and we need to keep pushing at it.
Yeah, I quite agree with you. And we've been in the asset management team. We've been working on a thing where you really have to justify why you want to drive. So particularly if you're going up to North Wales or something like that from Cardiff, the question would be, well, why can't you hire a car when you get there and go up on the train? You know, if you fall asleep on the train, it's not going to hurt anyone, is it? So, you know, just to limit the amount of time you spend driving. Yeah, so
it might hurt their eardrums if I start snoring.
Yeah. Well, it could be that.
You saw in the photographs, Andy, that was going to and from a site up on the Cambrian. An member of the staff was doing engineering supervisor staff duties. And yeah, lucky to be alive.
Indeed, yeah. And it's interesting as well that it came up, just putting it into context again, it came up recently in that incident down at just at Shawford, didn't it? With the guy there, he'd moved home to Essex from locally, but they kept him on in the job because they didn't have anyone to replace him. And he was either had the choice of drive home every day from Eastleigh to Essex, or sleep in his car. And again, people knew he was doing that, but nobody said, well, you know, you can't do that. You're going to have to stay in a hotel, or, you know, or we'll let you go, or whatever. So it's still going on, yeah. And driving, I think, is a particular area of concern. So the other thing that's big change, of course, is that and long way this way, somebody getting killed on the railway is now big news, isn't it? When I started out in the 70s, a railwayman getting killed at work would not have made the national news. And that shows how far we've come as well. You know, I mean, the fact that, you know, the tragedy down at Margam, you know, the fact that it made the national news shows what a rare event it's become. But it also shows that you've got to remain vigilant all the time. So, right. Anybody else with any?
Andy, I'd love to come in. It's a subject that we could talk about. This is Andrew Wilson speaking, the secretary. It's a subject that we could speak on, all of us, for hours, and our own experiences of our own safety and those of the staff that are working for us. I just think we all need to reflect on those occasions when we might not have made it home, but for the grace of God, and thank Brian for bringing it all up and bringing it back to our attention as we take a nice, well-earned summer break from the dark nights and the lousy weather that we're going to get. We may still get the lousy weather, but we won't get as long dark nights for the next 6 months. So thanks, Brian. I'll pull Paul out now. Okay.
Right, well, if there's no more questions or anything now, I thank Brian, and can I call on Mike Gallup to propose a vote of thanks. Hi, Mike.
Hello. Afternoon, Andy. Long time no see.
Indeed.
Indeed. I like the headphones.
Right, yeah, I see.
Very Ken Bruce.
Yeah.
Brian, hello.
Hi, Mike.
It must have been at least 2.5 hours since we've last spoken. But first of all, let me say I was absolutely, thoroughly, and genuinely delighted to be asked to give the vote of thanks. If I know, like me, you regard the railway as a public service, I can think of no better way to dedicate your life to serving the public, be it in the health service, be it in local government, or be it on the railway. And I think the ethos of public service, that kind of selfless dedication to your fellow man, is absolutely embodied by Brian. I think knowing Brian as I have for many years, his dedication, first of all, to his job, to getting the job done in some atrocious weather conditions at ridiculous times of the night, at Christmas, on holidays, birthdays, and whatever, you know, is phenomenal. But on top of that is Brian's absolute dedication, and again, a public service ethos to safety. Some of the examples that we've had today are truly fantastic. And I think, first of all, it's interesting, as you say, Andy, to see how safety and the culture of safety has evolved. And let's face it, culture is a really, really difficult thing to change. But Brian, the work that you've done in moving that dial through safety culture and change through your career to date has been absolutely phenomenal. And I know, as you've said a couple of times, that you know, you've got a fair bit to run yet, my friend. So don't stop, keep going, as we say. I think the work that you've done in safety has been absolutely phenomenal and humbling, I think, if I may say so. This year's been a difficult year for everybody for reasons that we well know. But personally, Brian, for you, it's been doubly difficult. As you said, you yourself have been suffering from cancer, and obviously your mother as well. And please pass on our best regards to your mother. It's been doubly difficult. You've borne that difficulty with your usual stoicism, your good humour, and an undimmed ambition to help your fellow man. And for that, again, I think it's absolutely humbling. Brian, you're a totally fantastic ambassador for the railway industry, for track renewals, absolutely, but on behalf of the railway industry, you are a phenomenal ambassador. I'm proud to call you a friend, a personal friend. I'd like to thank you personally for the work you've done. I'd like to thank you on behalf of Wales and Western Region for the work that you've done and the work that you're going to deliver over the rest of your career, including Bristol East. So deep breath, hold on tight and clench, as they say. And I'd like to thank you on behalf of the railway industry for what you've achieved, for releasing the potential of others, and for delivering a truly wonderful journey through safety culture. So, ladies and gentlemen, will you put your hands together and show your appreciation in the usual fashion for Brian Paynter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Right, just to before I close the meeting, our next meeting will be in September. As I said, depending on the COVID situation, we might actually be meeting face to face again then. So we'll keep you posted through the normal channels. Are there any issues arising from the notes of the last meeting? No. Okay, we'll take that as a true record then. Thank you very much again, Brian, and thank you for everyone for coming tonight.
Thanks, everyone.
Right. Okay.
Hi.
I'm not rushing off anyway, so.
I think so. I don't. I'm not actually living at the property.
Thanks all.
All right, Brian. Okay. Right, let's stop the recording.